Hey, what's going on, Guardians? TBL here, and there's a lot of buzz going on within the community after Bungie's release of yesterday's issue of This Week at Bungie, where they talked quite a bit about some of the Sandbox changes that are coming to Destiny 2. It was extensive, and if you haven't heard about most of the changes that are coming in the March 27th update, feel free to check out our video covering it right here on the channel. But today, we've got a few other things to cover, including a list of Q&As that some of the developers have been having on Twitter, in which they give out some really interesting bits of information, clarifying a few things from the Sandbox changes, as well as a very interesting news story, or really rumor, that's kind of popped up within the last few hours. We'll start off with the latter there. Well, it seems like we've gotten another possible leak towards the name and the release date of the upcoming Expansion 2 for Destiny 2. Earlier today, some images were posted reportedly showing that Amazon and GameStop had accidentally leaked out the name and release date for Destiny 2 Expansion number 2. These leaks popped up all over the Destiny the Game subforums, as well as game FAQs and right on the Destiny the Game subreddit. And they show that the expansion is now reportedly titled Destiny 2 The Fallen Warmind, and that it'll have a release date of May 8th, 2018. Now, of course, this being said, this could certainly be fake. This is, after all, just a rumor, and we have no way to verify whether or not this is the case, since people are reporting after this story came out. Of course, these options were removed from both Amazon and GameStop. But I will say it is around the time that Bungie would generally start advertising for their upcoming content. So take it with a grain of salt, but there you go. Destiny 2 Expansion number 2 might be titled The Fallen Warmind, and it might be releasing on May 8th, 2018, which is actually a little bit earlier in the month than I was expecting. I figured it'd be a late May release. We'll see whether or not this rumor holds any water in the coming weeks. Alright, off to the question and answer section. So, after the TWAB yesterday, senior Crucible designer Kevin Yanes and design lead Josh Hamrick took to Twitter to answer some specific questions that people had after reading the Sandbox update. And there were a few really gold nuggets in here, so I thought it would be worth our time to go through some of those questions and the answers that the designers had for us. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. First up, I noticed a lot of damage increases on pulses, scouts, and etc. mentioned in PvE, but not for PvP. Is the goal for decreasing time to kill based on buffing our abilities and power ammo spawns? Now, this is a very important question because, of course, they talked about buffing weapon archetypes within the TWAB yesterday, but they generally mentioned it in relation to PvE and not PvP. So I was worried that we wouldn't be getting any sorts of wide increases in power in PvP. Here's what they had to say. Any base damage or precision damage buff is both PvE and PvP. Bonus PvE damage goes on top of that. So they are indeed changing damage values for PvP as well. This is very good to hear. I know a lot of people were a little bit worried when they read the TWAB yesterday and they saw no real mention of changing direct weapon damage. But the developers have taken to Twitter and they have clarified that. Very good to hear. Next question. I see PvE-wise, loads of weapons are getting a damage boost. Is this a flat 10%? Or is it being individually tuned for each weapon class, and if so, possible to give us rough ideas? This, of course, in relation to the way your weapons work in PvE. And the answer was this. Changes are per weapon. I think the average is currently sitting at around 15%. So a average of 15% damage boost in PvE. This is exactly the kind of thing I want to see moving forward. Being a bit more powerful in PvE is never a bad thing. Next up. With the extra second of Invis, I can see it being used preemptively instead of as an escape move, like in D1. Will Graviton Forfeit extend that duration even further? And the answer to that is yes, Graviton Forfeit remains unchanged, and it will extend the time in your invisibility. Next question was, with changes, it feels like the Night Stalker gets hit hard. The Knucklehead Radar and the Geminis may no longer be viable in competitive and trials, and aim assist in Invis is gone, and smoke nades in comp and trials are less potent as they can't scramble radar. Are they being buffed elsewhere to compensate? This is in direct reference to the changes to the way Night Stalker class is working. They're going to be changing the way invisibility works so that invisibility no longer breaks tracking and it no longer breaks aim assist. You'll still be able to break that stuff with a dodge, but no longer with invisibility. Here's what they had to say. Not at this time. However, I run Night Stalker in 90% of playtests, including competitive, and I was still able to be very effective. And then what followed was a general conversation for how Josh handles Night Stalker in the PvP playtest. After that, we got a pretty good question about the change coming to competitive modes with the radar. Your roadmap is looking good so far. However, instead of removing the radar in comp and trials, I propose you limit the range of radar as a whole for all PvP playlists. I believe the radar's range is the problem. Removing it altogether feels counterintuitive. Which is definitely something interesting. One of the most radical changes they're making is the removal of radar in comp and trials. And while I was a huge fan of no radar in Inferno, and I think it could probably create some interesting scenarios in comp and trials, I still maintain that they should have it kind of like a Call of Duty radar system. Leave the radar there, but people will show up when they shoot or something like that. Anyway, here's what Josh had to say. We played like that for a while. It feels broken when you see someone closer to you than you'd expect, but your tracker is telling you no one is there. That being said, like I said in the TWAB, these changes are a step forward and not the end. Let's play it live and go from there. Continuing that sort of trend that Bungie's been having, saying, well, they'll take feedback and they'll continue balancing the game based off of that. This is a pretty big change and I'm willing to give it its shot, but then again, like I said before, I'm a little bit biased. I loved Inferno back in Destiny 1. Anyways, this user had a pretty good follow-up question, so we'll move on to that next. The solution to that problem is fixing the radar. If I can see a player in there within a double jump distance from me, they should appear on radar. If they don't, that is a bug, not an enhancement request. And that was followed up with this. I feel like we're saying the same thing. We felt like we didn't have enough room to do both. Shrink range enough to allow flanking, and now the radar feels broken. Extend the radar enough to feel right, and now you struggle to flank. Kind of circling the logic around their decision to remove it entirely for trials and force players basically to rely on their other senses of just really kind of paying attention to the map and watching flank zones now. It's going to be an interesting change. I don't know if a lot of people are going to like it, but I know certainly it's a step forward, you know, and as long as they're taking in feedback, I'm sure we'll figure out the right balance for things moving forward. All right, moving on to the next question. And this one's actually less of a question and more of a statement, but I thought the response to it was pretty good. If time to kill doesn't change, I and many, many others won't be coming back. This is definitely a sentiment that has made its way around the community, and one that maybe even myself, I might have expressed at 1 or 2 points of time. Certainly, if time to kill doesn't change, I don't really see much of a reason to come back to PvP. Here's their response. I think you should try 1.1.4 for a bit first, and then talk to us more about what you think knowing how those changes play. I'm not saying you'll change your mind, only that you'll have more context. And of course, that's a very developer answer to the question. But ultimately, it's not wrong. In order to determine whether or not you're going to enjoy something, you should play it. And that's definitely what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a little bit of time once 1.1.4 drops to get in there, determine whether or not I like the changes. And if I don't, well, back to Monster Hunter World for me. Next up, aim assist and invisibility explanation is confusing. Does this mean that aim assist is re-enabled after the dodge ends, but before the invis ends? And the response was this. Sorry you guys, I tried to write that multiple times, multiple ways, but clearly didn't get it perfect. But yes, aim assist is re-enabled after a dodge ends, but before invisibility ends. That's what's happening. You break tracking and aim assist briefly when you initiate a dodge. That's unchanged. But invisibility and tracking is re-enabled during invisibility. You're easier to shoot, and tracking grenades and the like will seek you out. This is a good change. I know I can't be the only person who has been a little bit disappointed that invisibility just completely breaks stuff like the colony. So I'm glad to see a little bit of a change there. Moving on. Would you mind giving us some more insight as to why the sniper flinch bug will take another 2 months to release? You could win over the hearts of many players and creators by prioritizing that. And here's the answer to this. Happily, it was a big, nasty bug that forced our artists to go through and do work on every sniper in the game. So a huge amount of work, and it means every sniper in the game has to get retested. Once we figured it out, we just didn't have the time to complete it for 1.1.4. Trust me, we tried and everyone except Father Time himself wanted it. But we do have it going through testing in 1.2.0 as you saw in the video, and we're very excited to get it out to you. And in response to another tweet about the same issue, they stated, it was a big bug that required a bunch of time to fix and requires a bunch of time to test. Just couldn't get it ready to go out for 1.1.4. So you can consider the whole sniper change, especially with linear fusion rifles, to just be another victim of the spaghetti code. But hopefully it's going to be ready by the time the expansion drops in May. Next question was about supers, and this is definitely something I wanted to hear. Any info on why super recharge times are going to be faster instead of giving more super energy per kill? I think the latter would raise the skill gap. I like the D1 super system much more for this reason. It was a big global change for PvE and PvP. We felt like it was just too long in general. That being said, we actually did bump up those amounts some too, and I'm glad you mentioned it because I need to make sure I put it into patch notes. So, in addition to your supers charging faster, you also gain more super energy per kill, so we're getting kind of a double whammy there to hopefully give you an opportunity to use your super more than once or maybe twice a game. Now, this next question was in relation to having a fourth weapon slot, someplace where we can stow our fusions, our shotguns, and our sniper rifles. I've seen a lot of this in the community, and I was very happy somebody asked it directly to Josh, and he gave a direct answer. Looks fun, but I really think we need 4 weapon slots. Way too much going on in the power ammo slot. To which Josh responded, "Give it a go when it's out. Like I said, we're not ever done working to make it as good as can be." Now, a lot of you guys might consider that to be kind of a non-answer, but I had to include it there because a lot of people have been asking about a 4th weapon slot or something to do with the power weapons that are kind of less used right now. And so their answer is basically play the patch when it comes out, see if it changes your mind. And I guess that's really kind of all we can do at this point. And in relation to that, another question about time to kill was asked later on and went like this. To clarify, is the time to kill remaining the same whilst movement speed is increasing? Wasn't quite clear in the update. Here's what Kevin Yanes had to say. Some weapons are being brought up to be more viable and competitive. We're modeling our ideal time to kill to that around precision auto rifles. Think the Uriel's tier. In current D2, most of our time to kill and pace is defined by weapons due to lack of variety in the gameplay. This means we have a fixed static time to kill, which is on the slow side. We're actively going to change that. Heavies, ability mods, and perks, movement, and weapons are being brought up to make sure the game is fast and spicy, and at the level we believe players would expect from Destiny. I look forward to you trying 1.1.4 and getting your feedback further. I know you're concerned about movement trumping time to kill, and I understand where you're coming from. In our playtests, we and external participants felt that disengaging is not as prevalent as it reads on paper. And I found this to be a really interesting answer, because while we do know that we're going to be seeing some damage increase for weapons in PvP, they're basically stating that they want to bring the time to kill basically to around the same level as the Uriel's Gift 450 RPM archetype of auto rifles, which I do believe the optimal time to kill for that archetype of auto rifles is like 1.07, and like the body shot time to kill is 1.6, so still a little on the long side for my taste. While that's an increase for some weapon archetypes, I think it's still too high. If they're shooting for around that 1.7 seconds, I think that's still a little bit too slow. But alright, Guardians, there you go. That's it for the news, and that's it for the Q&A. If you'd like to read some more of the questions and answers, be sure to hit up both Kevin Yanes and Josh Hamrick's Twitter pages. There's some really good stuff in there, and maybe you can have your own question answered if you tweeted at them politely. But alright, be sure to let us know what you think of all this stuff down in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, feel free to drop a like and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest Destiny 2 news. But I'm out for now. As always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty.